Welcome everyone to our Tech Member Webinar Series. Today our speaker is Paul Hunt. Paul Hunt is a pricing strategist, he's a writer, he's a speaker, and most recently he has become a tech chair. So we're very pleased to have Paul. Today he has specialized in the field of pricing for over 20 years. He is currently president of Pricing Solutions, and he is going to be with us today to share his insight and acumen on pricing and pricing challenges in this time. So today, if you do have questions during the webinar, I would ask that you use the chat box, or pardon me, the question box, type into the question box. Paul will be able to answer these questions at the end of the session. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Paul. Welcome, Paul.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ruth Ann. Pleasure to be here. So hello, everybody. It's I'm pleased to be here, and hopefully will be of some help to you in this time of uncertainty and change, unprecedented change. A lot of the lessons that I learned about how to price during turbulent times came out of my experience in 2008. We worked with a large number of clients who were going through tremendous change and disruption and needed to manage price very carefully. And I'm going to share with you a bit about why that is in a few moments. And so I'm going to be sharing with you a lot of the playbooks that we've developed, and we used them and developed them in 2003. And whenever there's extreme market disruption, there really is some best practices. And so that's what I hope to share with you today. So let's get started. And so first of all, it's pretty scary out there. We see that profits are declining. We see demand down. There's entire industries that are shut down. So that starts creating, or can possibly create, panic. And when you're a member of tech, you're around a great, you're in a community which is designed to prevent that. But it's still pretty scary, and particularly with pricing, what happens? Salesforce can lose confidence. That's a huge issue. We're going to talk about that. There's competitive pricing confusion. You kind of lose footing with what your competitors are doing, and as a result, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty there. We find there's a lot of short-term changes in pricing policy, which can become longer-term burdens, and I'll be talking about that. Prices get cut to maintain volume, and that can lead to price wars at a time when there's a significant decline in pricing happening, and then it can take years to rebuild to your initial level of profitability. So we're going to share with you best practices, things that you can do immediately, things that you should not do until further notice, and let's dive into it. So first of all, why does this topic matter? Well, you're here because you intuitively know it matters a lot. But if the average Fortune 500 company cut price by 1% and cost and volume remain constant, what's the average impact on profitability? It's 12.5%. And the math is this. It's, sorry, I'm having some problems just managing my slide progression here. So if you look at the average income statement, you've got bottom line about 8%. And if we take 1% of price off and we hold our costs and volume constant, that drops to 7%. So that minus 1% divided by 8% is a 12.5% decline in profitability. It's the single biggest lever you've got for managing your profitability. And yet companies tend not to manage it very scientifically or with great precision. And when we look at a recession, here I'm just looking at, if you want to, at 1993 and 2003, the numbers are even more significant for 2008. But what you see is the red line represents average EBITDA, so margin, a bottom line. And you see during a recession, it declines. And then the blue line represents the impact of a 1% price change. And you can see that in 2003, that number represented about 25%. So when you go into recession, the leverage of pricing becomes even more significant, much more significant. And so it's much more important that you manage it carefully and wisely. So our basic IP, our thinking about pricing is it's a process that can be executed with excellence. For you that are in tech groups where I've done this training already, you will have seen this. But there are 5 levels of pricing excellence. Level 1 is ad hoc or firefighting. Level 2 is policing, it's control. We call it stopping the stupid stuff. Level 3 is value-based pricing, the partner. It's outside in based on deep customer understanding. Level 4 is the scientist, bringing more science to pricing. Level 5 is mastery. The real danger during times of recession and dramatic changes to the market are falling to level 1. Literally, what's burning there is a company's profitability. And so it's price cuts, discounts. We're going to talk about that and how to do that wisely so that you're not at level 1. You kind of remain connected to levels 2 and 3. That's where you need to be in order to ensure that you come out of this profitably and intact. If you don't, then you run significant risk of really damaging your business. Okay, so how do we do that? There's 3 things I'm going to recommend. First of all, there's an analytical process that is very valuable to go through, and I'm going to suggest. It's applying what we call an 80-20 lens to the situation. The second thing is to adapt. You've got to change. We all have to change. It's a different market, but strategically. How do we do it smart? And then the third thing is enhance your Salesforce resilience. They are the front lines. They're the people that actually are right on the front lines of the battle. And so how do you make them effective? Okay, so let's dive into the 80-20. So all of us know what 80-20 is. It's the Pareto Principle. In business, what it really means is there's a few things that are critically important while the vast majority of things are not. A lot means a little, and a little means a lot. Right now, during a crisis, it's critical that you focus on the most important things. As CEOs, that's what you're trying to do every moment. You're here because pricing is one of the most important things. So how can we start ensuring that we're focused on making the most important decisions, protecting our most important customers, and also jettisoning those things that are adding complexity, costs, and causing us to get distracted? We cannot be distracted right now. So from a pricing perspective, we're going to use an 80-20 analysis that helps identify the critical few customers, the critical few products, eliminate complexity and complexity costs, minimize the resources required to operate the business, and reinvest in properly spent resources into the highest priority opportunities. We're going to do this all from a pricing perspective. So the 80-20 analysis in business, the core analysis is what we call a quad analysis. So I've got products on the top, and I've got customers coming down the side. And you see it on the top, it says 80 SKUs, and then it says 20 SKUs. Those are your products or your services. And we're looking at this analysis, and we're analyzing this by revenue. Okay, I want you to think of revenue. So when we say 80 SKUs, which SKUs represent 80% of your revenue? Those are your 80 SKUs. 20 SKUs represent 20% of your revenue. Similarly, when we get to customer, 80s customers represent 80% of your revenue. Which customers represent 80% of your revenue? 20s customers are those customers that represent 20% of your revenue. So we have a quad analysis here. We have quad 1, quad 2, quad 3, and quad 4. Quad 1 is your 80 SKUs that represent 80% of revenue, and your 80s customers that represent 80% of revenue. So 80% and 80%, that gives you a total of 64% of your total revenue. Quad 2 is your 80s customers buying your 20 SKUs. That's 16% of your total revenue. Quad 3 is your 20s customers buying your 80 SKUs. That too is 16% of revenue. Quad 4 are your 20s customers buying your 20 SKUs. That's 4% of revenue. I'm going to have time at the end of this presentation for questions, so if you have any on this, we will get to them at the end. Okay, so now, when you do this analysis, you just build this quad. you're now going to be able to do certain analyses. And here's the analyses that I want you to do. So, first of all, how many customers and how many SKUs are there in quad 1? And then we're going to analyze how many are there in quad 2. Now, if you're like the average company, you're going to be shocked to find that when you look at the number of SKUs and you go to quad 2, it grows dramatically. In this case, it's growing by 750%. This is a kind of common, a benchmark number we typically see with our clients. So the number of SKUs grows dramatically, even though they only represent 20% of your business. The number of customers, well, it's the same customers, but some of them don't buy your 20 SKUs. That's why it drops from 138 customers to 132. Now let's go to quad 3. What we find when we go from quad 1 to quad 3 is that the number of customers grows by 690%. We're going from 138 customers in quad 1. Those are your big accounts that represent 80% of your revenue. And then we got a whole bunch of 20s customers, and there's 916 of them. So we've got way more complexity there, way more customers. Now let's go from quad 3 to quad 4. And what we find is we've got roughly the same number of customers. It goes up slightly, but same as when we went from quad 1 to quad 2, we've got the number of SKUs proliferating, in this case, by 800%. In quad 4, we've got the most SKUs, we've got 6,183 SKUs, whereas we only had 780 in quad 3. So we now know that where some of the complexity in our business is. And as we think about focus, we're going to be able to focus our energy and our resources and make the best possible pricing decisions. So now, the next step that I want you to do is I want you to look at what your average margin is by quad. And if you're not unlike most of our clients, what you will find is that it will not be uncommon for your margins to be lower in quad 2 and in quad 4 than they are in quad 1 and quad 3, even though you have tremendous amounts more of complexity in those quads. So this is a misalignment of pricing. This is us clients, you're chasing volume and giving away price, and you're taking on more costs, and you're not getting results for it. You don't get a lot for it. So during a time of upheaval and downturn, this becomes more critical in terms of how we're going to manage complexity and focus ourselves to ensure we survive and thrive through this time. So what I want to do now is give you some benchmarks for what you would expect to see. If we were in normal times, here's what I would be recommending immediately in terms of changes. So I'm benchmarking, you see this index in quad 1 at 1.0. So quad 2 generally should be priced at least 5% higher. Your margins should benchmark 5% higher. So this 42 should go to 47%. Quad 3 should benchmark at least 3% higher than quad 1. So this should be jumping in at about 48%. And then quad 4, where we're seeing our lowest margins, should be indexing at 15% above based on the cost and the complexity. Companies are basically losing money every time they do business in quad 4 with these kinds of margins. So as you think about being in a really tough market and the kind of changes I'm going to make, I'm going to go quad by quad and talk about the strategies you can execute. But this should be indexed significantly higher and is way below. So if you were to make those changes, just those changes, you'd add 1.3% in quad 2, 1.4% in quad 3, and 1% in quad 4. That's 3.7% EBITDA improvement. You almost increase the profitability during normal times for the average business by 50% by getting this realignment. It's tremendously useful and powerful. And a number of tech groups have deployed this, for groups that I've presented to. Now the challenge is, and the thing that we're not going to do right now, unless we feel like we really want to jettison some of these customers, is that means we're going to have to take price increases in quad 2 on average of 8%, quad 3 9%, quad 4 22%. That is unreasonable during these times, obviously given the downturn in the market. But what we do need to do is realize that we are probably, going to need to manage these quads very differently. So you now know who your 80s customers and 80s products are. So what is the strategy for quad 1? We're going to overserve the 80s, and we're going to deploy key account management, and this is called the fort. Even though it's 64% of your revenues, research has been done to show that for most companies, it represents almost 100% of the company's profits. It's not unusual for that to be the case. And so this is where your profits are. This is where your business is. This is where your survival is. And so protecting the fort. How do I build moats? How do I keep these accounts? How do I secure my business? So we're going to talk a lot about pricing strategy for quad 1. Quad 2 is what we call a necessary evil. We have to have it because our 80s customers demand it. But what can we do to shift quad 2 demand into quad 1? Can we get customers to buy 80s products instead through perhaps lowering the price of some 80s products that will shift customers into that quad? Can we drive our compensation for our salespeople so that they move customers into quad 1? Get these quad 2 purchases shifted into quad 1. Often we have SKUs that are of minimal difference. And as a result, we have a red SKU in quad 2 and a blue SKU in quad 1. The blue SKU is much cheaper to produce. It sells a lot more. Can we get rid of the red SKU and move everybody to the blue SKU, reduce our prices, and be more effective in terms of protecting the fort, creating the fort, right? Okay, so then quad 3 is a really important quad. So here, the question becomes, do we have 20s customers that are cherry picking us? They could be 80s customers, but they're cherry picking us. If that's the case, the last thing you want to do is reduce prices to those customers unless you get significant growth in volume, unless they become 80s customers. If they move up into 80s and not just making the promise, but they give you something real, then you give them price concessions. Otherwise, with these folks, do not reduce price. They need you. That's why they're cherry picking. Or they are actually small accounts and they will never be 80s customers, which is the vast majority of these folks. And in that case, you need to lower your cost of doing business with them. That's how you get the 1%. That's how you protect your bottom line. So minimum order quantities, increased lead times, change your distribution, no direct sales. Do the things that reduce your cost to serve and keep these people profitable. And that will enable you to lower prices if you absolutely have to. Finally, I want to move to quad 4. The strategy for quad 4 during good times is eliminate and isolate. These are unprofitable accounts. The argument from CEOs I constantly get is, yeah, but they might be our biggest account someday. Okay, there may be the odd minnow that could become a whale, but 98% of your accounts there will never be a whale and will always remain a minnow. So separate them out. Who is real in terms of becoming a quad, an 80s customer, and who is not? These folks are unprofitable accounts. Now, you may not be prepared to jettison them, or you may be, depending on how urgent matters are and how badly you need to focus. But for the most part, these folks are eating resources. So raise prices. If you're not going to raise prices, then the playbook during turbulent times is do not lower prices for this segment. Do not lower prices. Hold your prices. Okay, so that's the quad analysis. We're going to have lots of time to come back to it. The key is greater focus, deploy your resources properly, lower your cost of doing business, be more competitive. You have to be more competitive right now. The market has shrunk, so prices are going to become tighter, margins are going to become tighter. The 80-20 quad analysis is a great way of bringing focus so that you can get there. That analysis can be done in a day or even less by one of your finance people. So hop to it and get that analysis underway. Get together with your executive team, debrief, and start building out your strategies by quad. That would be my first recommendation. Okay, let's talk about action number 2, adapting, but strategically. So first of all, what we find is that during a significant downturn, there's significant price pressure to reduce prices. The Salesforce it starts making a cacophony of sound. We need price reduction. We need price reduction. And so during a time like this, you are going to react with prices, but we want to do it smart. We want to do it surgically rather than across the board, or we call it keep your strategy clear, but prices cloudy. So you will make targeted price declines, often account by account based on need. You may, it depends on the industry you're in, and we'll talk a bit more about that. But for the moment, we do have a question. And Ruth Ann, can we jump to the second question in the polling?
Sure can. So,
okay, so maybe we can just ask folks.
You want me to launch it now?
Yeah, great. So the question is, do you have customers who are doing well? Healthcare, IT tend to be doing well right now. Do you have customers who are doing badly, restaurants, retail, or do you have both? So if you want to answer that question, we get a sense of where folks are at.
Most people are weighing in now. We're getting about 40% of people have come on board. So just give it a few more minutes, or a minute. Coming in strong here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Got about 60% have logged in right now. I don't want to take up too much time. So let's pull the poll now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. I'm going to close it. And I'm going to share. So there you go. So Paul, you see the results now?
I don't actually.
Oh.
I just see my screen.
Okay. So the results are 27% are doing mostly doing badly, 61% a mix of some doing well and others doing badly, and 11% mostly doing well.
Okay, interesting. So a real mixture there. And your strategy, the situation you're in is very different depending on which bucket you're in. The majority have some doing well and others doing badly. So that's the playbook for that situation. Is you want to keep your strategy clear, but your price is cloudy, because the people that are doing well, you do not want to be cutting prices for. The people that need some help, you want to be flexible, but smart about it, but principled. And so we'll talk a bit about that. The folks where most of your customers are doing badly, there's going to be tremendous pressure to lower your prices across the board. Be careful with that. That can be very dangerous. The folks that where most of your customers are doing well, price decreases is not your issue. Probably the issue is going to be, can I take prices up? I've got more demand than I've got supply. How do I handle it if you're in healthcare, IT, places like that? And we don't want to be seen as gouging. So we need to be smart about that. And we want to be principled once again, but we also don't want to leave a ton of money on the table. But we need to be principled about it. So how do we do that? Okay, so I'm going to move to the next slide. So hold off on making policy changes. So I'm going to give you an example from 2008. This is, we worked with a number of clients in a variety of industries. And in one industry, the suppliers immediately started extending payment to 90 days across the board. And so competitors followed, customers came to expect 90 days, and then several years after 2008, guess what policy was in place? 90 days. Another client in a similar industry extended payment terms in negotiated situations, so they didn't publish it. So with some customers, they did go to 90 days. Others, they went to 45, 60. It depended a bit, depending on the particulars of that account. But the entire industry didn't shift that way. They didn't become policy. And as a result, they were able to quickly get back to a 30-day average shortly after the 2008 recession. So if you possible, then don't lead, down the road to a policy change that's going to put you in a tough spot and really create cash pressures on you, where that's the last thing that you can handle right now, is having a bunch more cash pressure. So that's kind of one example. This is called the Pricing Strategy Playbook, and it's I want to share this as well because it kind of shares a playbook during different scenarios. And so here we have on the vertical axis demand. It's tight. There's more demand than capacity, or it's loose. I've got capacity, but I don't have enough demand. Most of us are shifting down here. The vast majority of us are down here. So some of us will be up in the top there. And then we've got costs, input costs. When they're low on the far left, they might be declining. We might have costs going down, like oil right now, if oil is a key ingredient. On the other hand, on the far right, our input costs are going up. And so as a result, we've got costs going up. So each of these quadrants represents a different playbook. The top left, it says swing for the fences. You've got tight demand and costs going down. That's a fabulous place to be in. Boy, do I ever wish that I was in that place now and that my clients were. The second one is ride the wave. We've got tight demand, but input costs are going up. There's more turbulence, but great place to be. We've kind of been there, haven't we? That's been the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But we're not in Kansas anymore, right? Things have changed. So now let's go down below. Demand is loosening up, costs are declining. We call that hunker down. You really want to kind of get into a position where you're solid and you're able, you can last it, you can weather the storm. And then when costs are going up and demand's coming down, that's dangerous times. There's two factors really working against us. So I want to talk to that one. And you can go back to each of these playbooks. This presentation will be available, as well in slide format if you want to come back to that. So if your input costs are going up and your demand's going down, we've got to really carefully segment our prices. And when I talk about segmentation, I mean products, the 80-20 analysis I ran you through, and customers. Because costs are going up, but demand's coming down, so that's pressure on price to go down, but input costs going up puts pressure to go up. So our margin squeeze is significant. So we've really got to be smart about where we take price, where we lower price, and where we hold price. Secondly, we must unbundle to lower our price. What can we do to reduce costs? And I'm going to talk more about that. Finally, and then contracts. What can I do to lock customers into a longer term contract so that I don't have to be, in this turbulence? Can I lock in existing customers who are loyal, they value what we have, give them some concessions that lock them in and reduce my turbulence? And then finally, the policy side, case by case. We don't want policies to be changing, which I just shared on in payment terms. We want to work with customers on a case-by-case basis, but anything that we do put into a contract, we want to have cost escalators. That's to protect yourself from, significant changes to commodities or input costs that you struggle with. So make sure you get those into your contracts. Okay, so that's kind of the adapt strategically piece, right? Strategy clear, prices cloudy, use the playbook. Now, enhance Salesforce resilience. This is perhaps the most critical piece, folks, because if you don't give your Salesforce the tools they need to get out there and fight and win and succeed and partner, then you're not going to succeed. So here's a situation. This is very common with amongst our clients. So a corrugated cardboard manufacturer has received a letter from one of its largest global clients indicating that due to declines in demand caused by the COVID crisis, they will be reducing pricing of all suppliers by 20% effective May 1st. Okay, so that's the letter that's come in. We now have 20 days and counting to deal with this. By the way, your costs have not declined. So this is a straight eat into your margin, and this is going to put you maybe at break even if this happens. So how do you respond? What additional information would you want? So here's the playbook. I'm going to share with you how we go through this and how organizations get ready for this. So first of all, there's two kinds of objections customers have: fairness objections and value objections. You've got to understand, and that these are the things that matter to them. And of course, they're trying to survive. They're trying to get through this. So the customer has sent a letter where they are not partnering. They are not focused on the relationship, but you have to stay focused on the relationship, and you have to create a win-win out of this that gets them back on track. So there's a couple things that I want you to know before I dive into this slide. Well, I'll get into it later, actually. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about fairness. Be prepared. Best practice, you need facts to support that you are being fair. You are not gouging during a time where they are hurting badly. You need documentation. You need your Salesforce. You need a script for your Salesforce explaining why you are fair as an organization and how you're approaching this crisis. So how are we sharing in this? That's got to be in the script. You've got to reinforce that you're reducing costs everywhere you can without hurting quality. You've got to have charts and data support why you are doing what you are doing. Commodities, foreign exchange. If you're selling to the US, you've gotten a bump with the exchange rate. Inflation, commodity indexes, etc. So I'm going to share a story. This is for a client of ours. So they sell that. So this corrugated paper company. And right now, this is drawn from another era, but I'm applying it to 20. This is the data that the client had at the time. So look at this, corrugated paper prices. This is the raw material that goes into making those boxes. It's coming down. The procurement team of their largest customer has this chart, and this is the chart they're going to show them when they come in, or they meet with them, or they don't even meet with them. They Zoom call with them to discuss this 20% price reduction. This is the company's prices. They haven't gone up. But look, the key input commodity cost has come down. They want a 20% price reduction. Hey, you should be able to afford it. Your costs are coming down. So the first thing you got to do is prove to yourselves, is this story true? Do I have something to share? In this particular instance, our client did not. Why? Our client did not have this ability to share this. Why? Because they had sacrificed taking price for over 6 years. Here we have corrugated paper prices over a 6-year period. Okay, I had the slide before showed you just 1 year of time. That's this piece up here. That's the year. But over 6 years, look at corrugated prices are up over 20%. Now look at the company's prices. They're up 6%. They have suffered for the last 6 years. They have not taken price. They don't have a lot to give. So 20% is out of the question. They will not be giving 20% to save this account. But now it's how do we save this account and make sure that we keep them? Okay, so this is the situation, but we share this with procurement. Now the ace you've got in your hole if you are a valued supplier right now, and this is what I wanted to share earlier, is that there's one thing that you should know is more important to procurement right now than price reductions. You know what that is? It's supply. Supply chains are disrupted. The number one thing that a supply chain manager, procurement manager, purchasing manager does not want is interruption to supply. So can you guarantee supply? Are you able to deliver? Are you a proven supplier that has delivered over time consistently? Do you have data to show it? Do you have the supply chain now to deliver? If you do, you've got an ace in your hole, unless there's other suppliers they've got that can just turn around in a dime and deliver, which right now is unlikely. So know that that's a powerful card that you have, and focus on that in terms of your relationship. So that becomes relevant for the next kind of objection. We just talked about fairness objections. I want to talk now about value objections. So right now, if we look at the chart on the left, we've got price on one axis, value on the other axis. What this customer is saying is, we want you to deliver the exact same value, but at a 20% lower price. Drop your price. That is not the way to go. So the best practice, the playbook during these kinds of negotiations is you vary your offer as you vary your price. You unbundle, you find ways to reduce price by reducing your costs. We call it gives and gets. What are the gives and gets that will enable you to reduce price so that you can, that will enable you to reduce costs so you can reduce price? So for this corrugated manufacturing company, they had 4 gives and gets that would enable them to lower price. Lead time. If the customer can give them 30 days lead time rather than a week, they can substantially lower price because their efficiency goes up, their output goes up, they're able to be much more effective. This company was running at 3 shifts. If they can get down to 2 shifts or to 1 shift, so they're not just trying to fill the plant with unprofitable capacity, then they've got a way of being being able to reduce price. Order precision. If you order with no tolerance in terms of the number of boxes you get, so you want 1,000 boxes and you won't accept an order for 999, then I have to waste corrugated paper in order to ensure I don't fall below. I will overbuild. But if you give me a tolerance of plus minus 1 or 2%, then I can use less product and I will deliver within that tolerance, so we can lower price then. Full truckload. If you order in full truckloads, and this relates to lead time, larger orders, then I can lower the price. And finally, no change orders. You give me the offer with no change orders, over the course of the order, then I can reduce price. So with these levers, the sales force is now equipped. They know how much they can give in order to get that concession from the customer, and that will get them down the 20%, and they remain profitable. That's the critical piece. What do I do to ensure I maintain profitability? I might be less profitable, but right now that's fine. We get it. Okay, so my question to all of you will be, and you don't have to answer at this moment, but at the end of this call, I think you should be meeting with your finance team, with your sales team, with your operations team. What are our gives and gets? What's going to enable us to give price to customers if we can get something in return? And then how do we execute against that? Okay, so we've run through the content, folks. So for the Salesforce Resilience, you've got to have a clear fairness message. You've got to identify your gives and gets, and you need to know your value. Guaranteed supply, your ability to turn around and meet the customer's demands and needs is of high value during a time of supply chain disruption That matters more to purchasing than price reductions. Don't give that away. Okay, so putting it all together. So first of all, we talked about the 80-20, and whoops, bear with me one sec here. So we talked about applying an 80-20 lens to the situation, and we had the quad analysis, and I'm sure there'll be some questions on that. Adapt strategically, so don't make broad brush policy changes. Be surgical, work account by account, keep your strategy clear, but your prices cloudy. And then 3, enhance Salesforce resilience. So focus on, be prepared to deal with why you are being fair during a time of crisis. What proves that you are being fair? And then from a value perspective, you don't just, you vary your offers, you vary your price, which requires gives and gets. So those are my kind of playbook. That's my advice. Those are my playbook items during turbulent times. There's a lot more we could go into, but that's the immediate piece that I wanted to share with you. So with that, I'll open it up and turn it back to Ruth Ann.
All right, I do encourage everyone to type into the question box any of your comments or questions for Paul, so that you can take the best advantage of his expertise in this area. Paul, I really liked how you said too about making sure that you let all of your customers know what you are doing, what your sort of your skin in the game, without compromising quality. I think that's a big message right now for a lot of companies.
Yeah, absolutely, Ruth Ann. That's the sticking true to who you are. You cannot sacrifice what you stand for, what you built the business based on. And so that's where you're not going to go. We've got to draw a line in the sand for customers, and they will respect that.
And like you say, telling your story. It's important that people know, like you say, defining who you are as a company and as an organization, your true value, your core values.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I have a feeling, Paul, that everyone is rapidly putting together some strategic plans with very fixed and focused strategy on pricing right now, that they're probably setting up Zoom calls, which is why they're not writing in questions right now.
Yeah, so with the 80-20, I've had a lot of tech members come back to me, and they've run the analysis and said, does this make sense? There's been lots of questions, but first they've run to their data to kind of try and do it. So if anybody has that analysis, they want to do the analysis and then run it by me for some feedback or input, you've got my email. I've also got a Tech Canada email. I'm happy to answer any questions and kind of run through those with folks and do that. Yeah.
We've got a couple questions just came in.
Okay.
Greg Bird is asking, so how does your 80-20, how does it apply for service-based companies? How does that flesh out?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Greg. So the key then is to take your services and actually segment them. So there will be some services so you need to bucket your services. So there will be large, medium and small projects. There will be projects for different industries. There will be different kinds of services you provide. So you need to create a structure around your offer so that you can do that. So for example, my own business, Pricing Solutions, is a consulting firm. We've got training, we've got transformation projects, we've got analytics projects. So those would be 3 buckets right away. Then we have different industries. We've got retail, we've got restaurant, we've got manufacturing. So those would be 3 other buckets. So as you go through those buckets, you start identifying, where is my revenue? Where is my, and which of those do I have multiple offers with, in terms of service offerings. So you kind of turn your services into products, essentially, in a way. You're kind of productizing to be able to measure.
Another question's come in, Paul, and it's really about leveling the playing field. So Brian Chubb is asking, if a competitor is willing to give with no gets, how do you get a big client to go with this? You know, how do you level that field?
Yeah, so so the key, Brian, is that you've got to remain competitive. So you can't, work. There's no hocus pocus to this. If your competitors are declining prices by 20%, you're going to have to, hopefully go down. You may only have to go down 15. You may not have to match. So the question during this crisis becomes, do I have to match? Do I have value? And that's why I mentioned guaranteed supply being so important. Or are there other value drivers that you've got that differentiate you so that you're not having to give it all away? Because, we went through this chart, right? Here. And so we've got to protect those 1% matter. So we've got to be smart about it. And so what you give away, is going to matter to your business. And so, there's no question in my mind that companies, many of you will have to lower your prices, sometimes significantly. It's a question of how far, how deep do I go? When do I say no? And by the way, that word, no, is the most important strategic word that you're going to have to use in the coming months. When do you say no? And it's a big word, it's a scary word, and it is the most important word. Okay, so I hope that helps, Brian.
I think you've also answered Jason's question, because Jason was asking about how do you differentiate yourself above competitors who are willing to offer those substantial discounts?
So the best one right now is supply chain related for many. And then other than that, what's your business built on? What's your track record? How have you been different? If you are not differentiated at all, if you are totally undifferentiated, then price will be the play. That is how you remain in business. But in my 30 years of doing consulting, I've never met a business that was 100% relied on price.
That's excellent. So would this apply again to O&G service industry? How does that?
Oil and gas, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was going to use oil and gas as my example, but I went with the cardboard kind of company because it was just more current. But we've got an oil and gas client, large client, and this is exactly the playbook that they go through, and this is exactly the training that we've provided them. And they've been very successful going through the various oil shocks. Oil went down dramatically. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, and they had just this kind of letter: your price for your products will be going down 20% in the next month. So this is the playbook for dealing with oil. It's the playbook for dealing with, COVID. It's the playbook for dealing with, any crisis that relates to a market downturn, and price has to be dealt with. And I'm not saying it's the answer, because there's no answer. If there was an easy answer, I wouldn't have been in business for 30 years and you folks wouldn't be here. This is really, really, really challenging and tough. And I've got a lot of sympathy for you as you go through these discussions and stuff like that. But you've got to keep it focused on win-win. It can't be win-lose. Otherwise, you're not going to be in business.
Right, and I appreciate the no. I think that very often that's a difficult place to get to. There's a fear factor with the word no.
Yeah, and that's why partly why I've shared the quad analysis, because the no becomes much easier with quad 4. Most companies don't say no nearly enough to quad 4. That's why they have all this complexity. It's 4% of revenues. You've got 60,000 SKUs, 1,000 customers. Hey, we start saying no there real fast, unless they are a minnow that can become a whale. But that's where get used to saying no there. And then when we get to the fort, quad 1, that's where it's really hard to say no, and you've got to be very strategic about it. and it requires a lot of courage, but you must be willing to say that word, because customers.
That's about being prepared, right?
Yeah,
That's about being
customer,
prepared, having that
that's right,
information.
exactly. And customers now will not stop pushing until you say no. Why would they? Why stop until I hear
And
my suppliers say no?
Gilles brings up a good point. He says saying no gives some value to your yes, because if you're always saying yes and never say no, you know, how does that make your company look?
Well said, Jill.
There's that.
Yes, that's a resounding, a big yes on my part to what you just shared, Jill. That's great. Thank you.
So I think too, like you say, being laser focused and strategic in terms of the preparation, the analytics, and really, like people or companies or industries that you might have, or suppliers in your quad 4 that you are, or those customer base, why are they still there? Is this a sentimental value? Is this historical? And
Correct.
This is where, again, you have to be laser focused on the evidence.
Correct. Yeah. And most of our clients during good times, they eliminate and isolate quad 4 and the profitability jumps dramatically. During bad times, I understand it's scarier to walk away from volume when volume's already declining. So as I said, it's no price decreases to quad 4, right? Identify the minnows that could become whales. And then other than that, if you have to, eliminate, that's the place, and then really zero in on and learn how to say no in quad 4 fast, and then get ready for quads, 3, 2, and 1.
Excellent. I just want to reiterate to everybody that Paul's slide deck will be available. Both the slide deck and the recording are available on our techcanada.com website under the COVID-19 tab at the top. So you'll see webinars and resources that we have made available to everyone. So not just members, but feel free to share this amongst your clients, your business associates, anyone who's going to see the value. And if you didn't see value today, you weren't on the webinar. It was fantastic. Thank you very much, Paul. That was, again, laser focused, very concise, very clear.
Great.
Any final summary you want to leave us with?
Yeah, keep the spirits up and use price strategically. Be strategic, even when you adapt. So, yeah, we're just all in this together. So let's keep pushing forward and wishing success to everybody.
Thanks again, Paul, and thanks to everyone on the webinar. The resources will be up on our website within about an hour's time. Thank you again. Take care, everyone. Be safe out there.